Welcome back to Sir Nightshade. The Appalachian Mountains have always carried secrets, old, haunting, and far too real. I'll be sharing 8 chilling true stories from deep within those woods, where legends meet the living. Before we begin, take a second to subscribe, drop a like, and tell me where you're tuning in from. Now, let's begin. It all started with a seasonal job. Honestly, it was a favor my uncle had set up for me, a kind of under-the-table gig helping inspect the condition of properties way out in the remote backwoods of eastern Kentucky. My uncle had a buddy who ran a tiny construction company, mostly doing maintenance work on abandoned hunting cabins scattered deep in the Appalachian hills. And when I say deep, I mean the kind of places that feel like forgotten relics, trapped in ancient forests where time itself seems to stand still. Every fall, before the snow really sets in, they'd send someone out to do a round of checks, make sure the roofs hadn't caved in, no one had broken in, no rot or raccoon damage to the insulation. Just basic stuff on a checklist. The pay was surprisingly good, especially considering most of these places were miles beyond any cell signal. But money wasn't the reason I took it. The best part was that it didn't require much talking. At that point, I was in a really bad place. Burned out doesn't even begin to cover it. I felt hollow inside, no energy for conversation, crowds, or anything. Really, I just needed somewhere quiet. Somewhere I could breathe without feeling the world pressing down on me. So when they handed me the ring of keys, the inspection forms, a gas card, and the keys to an old company pickup, I took them without hesitation. The folder was thick, about 30 cabins in total. Each key came with a small metal tag stamped with a number and the name of a nearby creek or trail. Cabin 1, Cabin 2, Cabin 3. They weren't addresses, just vague hints. Most of them could only be reached by winding gravel roads that twisted through the mountains, like they were trying not to be found. The kind of places urban legends come from, where the trees feel like they've seen too much. No cell service, no road signs, just red dirt, endless trees, and the occasional mailbox half buried by the ditch, like a lonely gravestone. A few of the cabins were in surprisingly good shape. Others were little more than 4 leaning walls and a roof you could count the stars through. I was used to rural life, so none of it bothered me. By day 4, I'd already checked off 12 cabins without incident. The job became a rhythm: drive, inspect, lock up, drive again, mold here, loose hinge there, a pile of raccoon droppings in the corner. Nothing unusual. The silence of the mountains started to heal me. I was beginning to feel human again. Then came Cabin 13. The key tag read Hawthorne Creek 4. The directions were vague. About 3.2 miles past the shallow fork. Look for the post. There was no sign for the turnoff, just a broken wooden post leaning sideways, its paint nearly bleached away by time. I slowed down and steered off the road beside a sagging, barbed wire gate. The wire hung loose, like a wet string between rusted posts. No lock, no chain. It wasn't meant to keep anyone out. It was just there, open enough to invite curiosity, closed enough to feel like a quiet dare. I killed the engine, slipped the keys into my pocket, and stepped out. The sudden silence hit hard, piercing. The air was crisp and dry. Around me, the trees pressed close, their bare branches knocking against each other with the clatter of dry bones in a tin box. I climbed over the gate. A faint trail led uphill, more worn by time than by footsteps, curving lazily up the slope. It took about 10 minutes to reach the top. The cabin stood in a small clearing, leaning slightly, as if trying to fall backward into the hill. Dark, weathered wood, one window boarded shut. A metal chimney streaked with rust, staining the roof like dried blood. It wasn't frightening, just neglected, forgotten. It looked sad, like it had given up on being anything else. I knocked on the door. I don't know why. Habit? Maybe. The sound was dry, dull, swallowed instantly by the dense woods. Then I unlocked it and stepped inside. The place was small, just a single room. Dust so thick it blurred the edges of everything. A fold-out cot, a wood stove, a few crooked shelves nailed into the wall. Nothing looked disturbed, not vandalized, just sealed in time. Except for one thing, the air. The air felt wrong. Not damp, not rotten, and just still. Unnaturally still. Like it had forgotten how to move. Heavier near the floor, colder in the corners. The silence was so dense it pressed against my eardrums. I tried to shake it off, focusing on the checklist. Roof intact, windows secure, signs of animal intrusion, none. Then I noticed it, a narrow door in the back corner, cracked slightly open, small, almost hidden in shadow. As I stepped toward it, my hand, without thinking, slid down to the utility knife on my belt. What was inside wasn't a closet, or if it wasn't meant for hanging coats. The whole space, no bigger than a pantry, was filled from floor to ceiling with glass jars. They were stacked with unnerving precision, arranged by size, then by label, dozens and dozens of them, some as small as baby food jars, others the size of pickle jars. Each one held a murky, pale yellow liquid, thick and resinous, like old sap, and floating within that liquid, like specimens in a madman's lab, were parts. Every jar had a label, written in delicate but careful handwriting, faded but legible. Lung, thigh, vertebra, ear, scalp. The script was thin and deliberate, the kind of handwriting you'd see on a century-old manuscript. I remember one that read, nail bed. Another said canine tooth. Some jars held tiny bones. Others contained curled-up pieces of skin, like wet leaves, hair still clinging to the glass, swaying faintly in the fluid whenever I shifted my weight. They weren't thrown in like garbage. They were organized, meticulously, categorized by region, lower limbs, upper limbs, internal organs, face. It felt like stepping into an exhibit curated by someone who should never be allowed near people. My mind scrambled for a rational explanation. I told myself it was old, probably illegal taxidermy out here in the middle of nowhere, maybe an amateur biologist with a twisted hobby. It was unlawful, sure, but not recent. That's what I kept repeating in my head. The dust on the shelves, the faded ink, this was old, historical, not active, and even so, my hands trembled as I pulled out my phone. I took one photo, just one. I did it fast, like I was afraid the flash might wake something up, afraid the phone might capture more than I wanted to see. I didn't look at the photo. I just closed the door, the soft click sounding far too loud in the heavy air. I went back to the checklist, marking boxes just to keep my hands busy. Foundation stable? Sure. Roof intact? Whatever. I just needed to leave. I stepped outside and slammed the main door shut behind me. But the trail looked different. Subtle, but wrong. Narrower. The trees had crept in closer, their branches hanging lower than I remembered, as if they'd grown while I was inside. I started walking, ignoring the sharp tension crawling up my neck, the feeling of being watched. The path curved the wrong way. The slope tilted at a different angle. I walked faster, faster still. I should have seen the gate by now, the truck, the rusted barbed wire fence. But no, just more trees, thicker brush, the air pressing tighter against my skin. And the sound was gone. Everything was muffled, as if I were moving underwater. No birds, no rustling branches, not even the crunch of dry leaves under my boots. Just a flat, Suffocating silence. Cold, sharp panic began to rise in my throat. I turned back, hoping to retrace my own steps, find the cabin again, and start over. Maybe I'd taken a wrong turn. The clearing appeared, but something stopped me dead. The cabin door. It was open, wide open. I knew I'd closed it. I'd heard the latch click. My blood went cold, shaking. I forced myself to look inside. The jars weren't in the closet anymore. They were outside, arranged neatly on the windowsill, clustered beside the stove. One sat right in the middle of the cot. And now there were more of them. Dozens more, maybe twice as many as before. The labels weren't faded anymore. They were fresh, written in thick, dark ink that looked wet. Femur, wrist, palate. And in the center, like the main course of some grotesque dinner, was a jar labeled tongue. The only one not sealed. A little of the yellow fluid had spilled out, soaking into the wood beneath it, leaving a faint, glossy stain. The smell wasn't strong. It wasn't rotten. It was just wrong, like something too ancient to name. I didn't touch anything. Didn't speak. Barely even breathed. I backed away from the door, unclipped the company radio from my belt, and pressed the call button. No voice. No static. Just a long, steady hum, like the sound of a television left on in an empty room as I turned and started walking. Not running. Not yet. Some primal, animal part of my brain screamed that I didn't want to act like prey. But I moved fast, pushing through branches that seemed to reach out and grab at my clothes. I stumbled once. My knee slammed into a buried root so hard I saw stars burst behind my eyes. But I didn't stop. I just kept moving, choking down the panic, focusing on one desperate thought pulsing in my head. The truck, the truck, the truck. I kept going until I saw it. A glint of metal through the trees. My truck, right where I'd parked it. I almost didn't believe it was real. It looked too clean, too still, like a lifeless prop on a stage. But I ran. I sprinted the last stretch, legs moving on their own, fumbling for the keys in my pocket. The driver's door was locked. That detail froze me. My heart slammed in my chest. I never locked the doors while inspecting, especially not out here. But the keys were right there, in my hand. I jammed one into the lock, twisted, yanked the door open, and threw myself inside, slamming it shut behind me. And that's when I saw the jar. It sat neatly in the center of the dashboard, small, square, no condensation inside, like it had just been placed there seconds ago. The label was clear, written in that same fresh, dark handwriting. One single word, voice. I stared at it for one heartbeat. Didn't move, didn't breathe. Then the meaning hit me like a nightmare breaking open. The dead radio, the silence in the woods, and now, this label. I jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, shattering the suffocating quiet. I threw it in reverse and backed up without looking. Gravel sprang beneath the tires like it was trying to hold me back. I didn't stop driving. Didn't care about the turns. Didn't care about the clattering sound from the back seat. Didn't even care when I thought I saw something move in the rearview mirror. I just drove, eyes locked on the dirt road ahead. I drove for over an hour before I saw another car heading the opposite direction. My cell signal came back, 1 bar, then 2. The first thing I did was call my uncle. I told him I wasn't feeling well, that I was done. I wasn't finishing the job. I didn't give details. I didn't mention the photo. I didn't return the keys, or the truck, or the folder. I just drove home. I didn't stop once. That strange job came to me through a man named Vince. I only met him once, at a supply store in Barlow. He said they needed someone to clear trails on a stretch of private land, a seasonal job, paid in cash. At that point in my life, it was exactly the kind of break a nearly broke man, living out of his car after quitting a warehouse job, couldn't afford to pass up. Vince scribbled a phone number onto a crumpled napkin, told me to ask for someone named Maynard, and said I'd appreciate the isolation, so long as I wasn't the jumpy, anxious type. I didn't think I was. It was late September, the chill of October already creeping in. To me, the job sounded like peace. A pause. A place to finally think things through. The place was called a reserve, but it wasn't publicized anywhere. No website, no flyers, just an address scrawled on the back of an old, creased paper map that looked older than I was. When I finally found it, the entire area felt unreal. The entrance was a rusted iron gate with a slack chain, hidden at the end of a twisting gravel road miles off Route 27. A tilted wooden sign, hand-painted in peeling white letters, read, Black Hollow Nature Reserve, authorized personnel only. It had that weary, forgotten look of somewhere meant to stay unnoticed. A small cabin sat just past the gate, its roof bowed and its porch sagging like it hadn't held a living soul in years. That's where Maynard was. Hair white as chalk, reflective vest over a flannel shirt, hands cracked and weathered like old leather. He didn't say much, just asked if I'd brought a machete. I nodded. He handed me a faded topographic map, a beat-up radio that looked like it came from a pawn shop, and pointed to where I'd start, Sector 3. Then he deliberately drew a thick red X over a spot labeled Pine Gulch. "Stay away from there," he said, his voice flat but heavy. "The ground's unstable. If you wander in, nobody's coming after you." It wasn't a threat, just a plain, cold fact. I nodded again. He didn't smile, just turned and went back inside. I've always liked being alone in the woods, the silence, the predictability of nature. I parked and started walking. The trail was narrow, but every few hundred yards there was a numbered post and a splash of red paint, the only way they kept us from wandering off the maintenance path. I hiked for about 3 hours. Everything was normal, until I reached the campsite, a small clearing, a broken fire ring, no bird song, no insect hum, just the dry, earthy smell of late autumn and the distant, rhythmic creak of trees rubbing together in the wind. It was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that feels intentional, like the whole forest was holding its breath, waiting for something. I dropped my heavy pack to the ground, quickly strung a tarp between 2 trees, and started gathering firewood. Dinner was miserable, instant noodles and a chunk of dry cornbread. I sat cross-legged, chewing slowly, the flickering firelight the only line separating me from the hungry black of the trail beyond, by habit. I arranged my gear with care, knife within reach, boots beside the tarp, headlamp clipped to the pack, everything ready, in case something started sniffing around it. And then, something did. It began small, an out-of-place sound, a faint thump, deliberate, just louder than a pine cone dropping, maybe 10 feet away, hidden behind the thick brush. It wasn't a twig snap. It was muffled, like something heavy but soft had been set down. I froze, half a bite of cornbread caught in my throat. I didn't move, barely breathed. Slowly, I turned my head, scanning. Nothing. Just darkness, undergrowth, and the dying light fighting to hold off the night. I stood up and deliberately stomped on the leaves underfoot, loud, to announce myself. Still nothing. No reflected eyes. No breath. No movement. I told myself it was a rock rolling downhill or a lost deer, shrugged, and sat back down. That's when the first real shot of adrenaline hit, because I saw something lying right in the center of my ground cloth. A small stone, round, smooth, and unnaturally clean. I was certain it hadn't been there before. I would have seen it. I kept things organized. It sat dead center, exactly where I'd set my spoon moments ago. I picked it up. It wasn't sun-warmed. It was body-warm. The kind of lingering heat that comes from brief, recent contact with human skin. Logic collapsed in on itself. I scanned the slope behind me, heart hammering. No footprints, no broken branches. But the air itself felt different now, heavier. The quiet wasn't just quiet anymore. It was compressed, as if something invisible was waiting just beyond the firelight, watching to see what I'd do next. I tossed more wood onto the fire, slid the knife into my belt, and kept the backup flashlight in hand. Lying to yourself is easy in the dark, but the faint, human warmth of that stone in my palm shattered every comforting thought I had. Sleep was impossible. I lay under the tarp, one eye open, hyper-aware. Every gust of wind, every shifting shadow, felt personal. Then, past midnight, the game changed. I heard it again, louder this time, closer. Not one sound, but a slow, deliberate series of rustles. 1, 2, 3, then silence. After a long pause, it started again, from a different angle. This wasn't random animal movement. It was too slow, too calculated, like someone timing their steps, studying me. I reached for my headlamp. It was gone. I shot upright, breath locked in my chest. My gear had been neatly arranged, headlamp clipped to my pack, knife at my right hip, boots by my feet. Now, the headlamp was missing, and one boot had been dragged several feet away, toward the edge of camp. My pulse roared. I grabbed my spare flashlight and swung the beam in a frantic arc until it caught something. At the far edge of this clearing, my missing headlamp was standing upright on the forest floor, still on, its pale light glowing faintly under the trees. It looked, placed there, gently, just far enough to make me step out and take it. I moved toward it, knees stiff, shallow breath, feeling exposed and deeply violated. I picked it up. It was still warm. Nothing else moved. No sound. No cracking branches. Just me, standing alone in a circle of dead silence, holding the stolen light that used to be mine. After that night, I pulled every remaining piece of gear as close to the fire as I could, stacking it all inside the ring of light. I sat there with the knife in one hand and the flashlight in the other, waiting, because I knew the game wasn't over. It took about half an hour for the real crescendo to begin. The footsteps started just beyond the firelight. They had rhythm, heavy, deliberate, low. Not the scuffling of an animal, nor the cautious tread of a person. Too heavy for wildlife, too calm for a stalker. They began circling the camp, first about 20 feet away, then tightening gradually, always just outside sight, hidden behind a darkness that felt less like an absence of light and more like a wall. I shouted into the woods, and the steps paused, an acknowledgement made of silence. When I threw a dry branch into the trees, they stopped again, then resumed instantly. Same tempo, same precision. Whatever was out there knew my fear and enjoyed it. It was a cold, deliberate mockery. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed frozen in place until the last ember collapsed into white ash and the morning chill seeped into my bones. Exhaustion must have taken over. I drifted off, sitting upright. When I opened my eyes, the sun was up, but the silence remained. Not the normal quiet of the forest, but a dead, weightless stillness that swallowed sound whole. I packed everything in under 5 minutes. No food, no map check, just movement. One thought in my head: get out. But escape wasn't simple. The trail felt wrong immediately. The first maintenance post was gone entirely. The second was there, but turned backward. Worse. Someone had sprayed over the original number with the same red paint and reversed the arrow. Someone, or something, was trying to trap me. I checked my phone. No signal. GPS flickered, glitching like I'd fallen off the map itself. It took me hours longer than it should have to find the right turnoff. When I finally saw the ranger's shack again, a raw, trembling relief flooded through me. I didn't stop. Didn't look back. Just unlocked my truck with shaking hands and drove. I kept going until I saw a sign for Bell Point and pulled into the first diner with its lights on. I sat in a booth, ordered coffee, and waited for the trembling to stop. When I went to the restroom, I happened to glance at my truck's rear windshield, still coated with a thin film of mountain dust. Drawn into the grime was a symbol, a perfect circle bisected by a single vertical line. I knew it instantly. It was the same mark Maynard had drawn over the map, the one for Pine Gulch. My blood went cold. Whatever it was hadn't just watched me, it had followed me. I drove straight to a car wash, scrubbing the glass until my knuckles bled. But even as I rinsed the last trace away, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was standing among the trees across the road, watching, waiting, unmoved. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard those same slow, rhythmic footsteps. By morning, I searched every online forum I could find. Nothing about the symbol, nothing about switched trail markers. Just vague, chilling warnings. Don't wander off the main loops. Then I got a message from an anonymous account. It read, "Worked there once. Lasted 4 days." That was it. The account was deleted the next morning. I tried emailing the reserve. No reply. Maynard's number was dead. 2 weeks passed, and I almost convinced myself it was over, just a nightmare that clung too long. Then, one morning, a plain white envelope appeared in my mailbox. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a single glossy photo. It was me, sitting by the campfire, leaning forward, holding that small, warm stone. The shot was taken from the woods, maybe 20 feet away. The framing was perfect, balanced, crisp. Just me and the darkness behind me. Not black, but thick, solid. A final reminder that some things, once seen, can never really be left behind. That autumn, I was little more than a ghost on the road, living off seasonal delivery contracts. My world was confined to the cab of a truck, just enough money to cover rent and keep a few things in a refrigerator that was usually empty. Honestly, solitude was something I didn't just tolerate. It was something I sought out. A friend eventually got me a gig with a logistics company out in Johnson County. They specialized in hauling cold medical supplies to scattered clinics across the Appalachian Valley. It wasn't exciting work, but it was steady. Every evening around dusk, I'd load the truck and settle in for hours of quiet highway. My only company, a thermos of coffee, a stack of delivery slips, and an old AM radio that never stopped hissing with statics. I loved that isolation. By late October, I knew those winding, ink-black roads well enough to drive most of them without GPS. Every ridge, every blind curve, every wisp of fog that clung to the hollows, I knew them like the lines on my palms. Maybe that's why, when something strange finally happened, it unsettled me to my core. It was a Tuesday night, near the end of my shift, when the old thermal printer beside my seat spat out one last slip. The paper was still warm when I tore it off, reading the words that sent a chill through me. Delivery request, temporary medical station, Juniper Hollow Extension. My stomach dropped. I'd driven through Juniper Hollow dozens of times. The note stressed, priority refrigerated equipment. Must arrive before midnight. I checked the big county wall map, an old, creased relic older than I was. Sure enough, Juniper Hollow was there. But it was a dead end, a narrow spur leading into deep woods near an abandoned coal mine. There was no extension. Beyond that point was nothing but forgotten wilderness and the ghost stories people told about it. I showed the slip to Rick, the night supervisor. He squinted at it, then shrugged. "Probably a new site," he said, his tone dismissive. "They've been building out there since spring. If the GPS gives you coordinates, follow them. Drop it off and head back. Lorne." And the GPS did have something. A faint gray line, flickering across the map, splitting from the main road. It showed only one destination. No intersections. No return route. Just a lonely artery that didn't exist on any printed map, like a fresh vein under living skin. I told myself it was just a temporary setup, some pop-up medical outpost before winter hit. It almost made sense. Around 9 that night, I left the depot. The air had that sharp, metallic chill that warns of the first snow. My headlights caught lazy flakes spinning in the mist, but they melted the instant they touched the road. I drove through 2 whole counties without passing another car. The world sealed in a thick, dreamlike silence. When I reached Juniper Hollow, the fog had turned heavy, so dense it felt like a blanket pressing down. The road narrowed, cracked, the trees leaning close on either side as if eavesdropping. After the last mailbox, the world simply became forest. Then, out of nowhere, the GPS spoke. "Turn left," it said, too loud, too calm. I slowed. There was no intersection, but when my headlights swept across the trees, I saw it. A strip of black asphalt, cutting clean through the woods. Perfectly smooth. No road markings. No signs. It looked brand new, too flawless, as if it had been poured earlier that very day. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, but the little arrow on the GPS kept pulsing, a silent, digital command. So I turned in. The new asphalt road immediately sloped downward, twisting tighter and tighter like a coiled rope. The fog thickened fast, wet, heavy, swallowing everything, until I could barely see the hood of my truck. It felt like the mountain itself was pulling me into its gut. The radio dissolved into dead static, and my phone lost all signal. I was cut off from the world. All that remained was the steady growl of the engine, the rhythmic hiss of the tires against the cold, wet pavement, and the pounding inside my chest. I watched the odometer tick by, 3 miles, then 4, then 5. Still nothing but trees, endless and dark, devouring the light. Just when fear began to curdle into panic, a faint orange glow appeared ahead. At first, I thought it was a porch light, but as I got closer, I saw it came from a single oil lamp, its flame unmoving, unnaturally steady. A 2-story wooden house emerged from the fog, large but sagging. Its shape gave off more the feeling of a tomb than a home. It stood alone in a clearing of dead grass and broken soil. No cars, no power lines, no sound. It didn't look new, it looked preserved, like something forgotten and left to rot in the cold isolation of the hollows. And yet, the GPS coordinates matched perfectly. The paper slip on my dash still insisted, "Must deliver before midnight." I parked on the gravel shoulder and shut off the engine. Silence fell, immediate, absolute. I could hear my own breath, the soft ticking of the cooling engine, nothing else. Then, in a narrow upstairs window, I saw movement, a silhouette passing by. A woman. I grabbed the delivery box, a standard insulated container labeled simply, "Refrigerated medical specimen." I stepped onto the porch and knocked. The door opened almost instantly, as if she'd been standing there, waiting in the dark. She looked to be in her early 30s, wearing a plain sweater and jeans. Her smile was polite, but unnervingly stiff, and her wide eyes didn't move. They were too still, too calm. "You're late," she said. Her voice was flat, not angry, not curious, just stating a fact. "Please, bring it in." I started to explain the delivery protocol, but she cut me off. "It needs to stay cold. The refrigerator's in the kitchen." Reluctantly, I stepped inside. The air was thick with a strange, unpleasant smell, part antiseptic, part dust and rot. The walls were bare. The furniture mismatched and positioned at odd angles. Only a single oil lamp burned on the counter, its amber glow throwing jittery, trembling shadows that made the room seem to breathe. I followed her into the kitchen and set the box on the table. In the corner stood a refrigerator, an ancient model, huge, with a heavy metal handle. My eyes drifted downward. The power cord was coiled neatly on the floor, unplugged. She noticed me noticing. "It's been acting up," she said quickly, her tone hollow and rehearsed. As she spoke, she turned her head slightly, listening to something deeper in the house. That's when I heard it. A man's voice, low, calm, and terrifyingly steady, echoed from the hallway. "Ask him to check the date." The woman froze. Her shoulders went rigid, her hands limp at her sides. She didn't turn, didn't answer. Again, the same words, identical tone, perfect cadence. "Ask him to check the date on the label." No urgency, no emotion, just repetition, like a phrase practiced to perfection, or an echo trapped in a loop. My stomach turned to ice. I looked down at the medical box. No date, no printed information, only a torn white sticker in the corner. Cold dread crawled up my spine, whispering danger in a language beyond reason. I looked toward the hallway. It was pitch black, the kind of dark that swallows light whole. At the far end, through a half-open door, I could see only emptiness, vast, waiting, and full of threat. "I'll come back once the paperwork's sorted," I managed to say, forcing my voice to stay calm and professional, even as my throat felt dry as dust. The woman didn't react at all. Her eyes were fixed on something behind me, on nothing, and yet something. Her breathing grew shallow, quick, almost trembling. Then it came, the sound. A deep, dragging creak from somewhere down the hall, slow and heavy, as if something enormous was shifting its weight across the old wooden floorboards. That was my cue. I turned and walked straight for the door. Not running. I didn't want to provoke anything, but I didn't hesitate either. The moment my boots hit the cold porch step, another sound echoed out from inside, a long scraping noise, deliberate and slow, like something heavy being pulled across the floor, like a foot that wanted to rise, but couldn't. I didn't look back. I slammed into the driver's seat, shut the door, and threw the truck in reverse without checking the mirrors. Gravel sprayed as I floored the gas. For a brief second, the headlights swept across the house one last time. The woman was still standing there in the doorway, arms limp at her sides, eyes locked forward, perfectly still. Behind her, deep in the blackness of the hallway, stood a tall, impossibly thin figure. Narrow shoulders, a long face, visible only for a heartbeat before the beam of light passed, and the darkness swallowed it whole. I didn't stop until my tires hit the cracked, familiar asphalt of Juniper Hollow Road. I glanced at the GPS. The faint gray line that had guided me there was gone. The screen showed only a green blur, an uncharted zone, with a message across it. Area not on map, eh? No road, no destination, no evidence of where I'd been. I pulled into a highway diner, its neon lights buzzing like salvation, and called dispatch. It took 2 dropped calls before Rick picked up, groggy and half asleep. I spilled everything, every detail, reading him the address off the delivery slip. Silence. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, but trembling underneath. "Lorne, there were no scheduled deliveries out that way tonight. There's no Juniper Hollow extension in the system. That's undeveloped land." I insisted, desperate, telling him about the printed order. He asked for the job number. When I read it aloud, he exhaled sharply. "That code hasn't been used in weeks," he said. "Just come back. We'll figure it out tomorrow." The next morning, fear and curiosity fought inside me until one of them won. I drove back, following the same route. But when I reached the turnoff, the place where that perfect new asphalt had cut into the woods, it was gone. Only a rutted dirt path remained, overgrown and blocked by fallen branches and stones. No pavement, no clearing, no house. At the base of the hill, I stopped at a small general store. The old man behind the counter knew every inch of the valley. I asked about a medical outpost or a big house up there. He frowned, thinking. "There was a lodge," he said finally. "Back before the mine closed. Big place. Burned down. Sometime in the 80s, I think. Never rebuilt." I didn't ask for more. I didn't need to. That night, I turned in my truck keys and told Rick I was done. He tried to talk me down, said I just needed rest. But when I went to grab my jacket from the loading bay, I froze. There it was, the same delivery box. White, sealed, labeled, refrigerated medical specimen. No condensation, no date, no paperwork. It had come back. No one had signed for it. No one had logged it. I didn't say a word. I just walked out, got in my car, and started driving north. I didn't stop until I was out of the mountains, and my phone signal was steady again. On paper, my job sounded simple. Keep watch, stay awake, make sure no one slipped in to steal copper or get themselves killed in a place that hadn't mattered in decades. I was a night guard for a decommissioned hydroelectric plant, tucked deep in the folds of the Appalachian Hills, more than an hour from the nearest town with a cell tower. It wasn't glamorous work, but the pay was steady. And, most importantly, out there in that godforsaken valley, no one bothered me. Originally, the county hired our security company because the local scrap scavengers got too greedy. They'd cut through fences, haul away old transformers, coils of cable, junk to most people, but full of precious copper if you knew what you were doing. My shift ran 12 hours, from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. Long enough to warp your sense of time and reality if you weren't careful. Out there, once the sun went down, the dark didn't just arrive, it swallowed everything. The power station sat in a narrow valley, strangled by silent pines and underbrush. The great dam was now nothing but a cracked ribbon of concrete, slick with moss and graffiti faded into oblivion. The river that once thundered through the turbines now trickled brown and sluggish, more a tombstone to dead industry than a source of power. In front of me stood the chain-link gate, the gravel road curling down toward the plant, and my little trailer, a guard post, kitchen, and living room all in one. The air smelled of mildew, stale coffee, and old insulation. My only companion was a bank of outdated security monitors, humming faintly as they cast flickering black and white ghosts of the yard, the gate, and the crumbling control building. The timestamps were frozen years in the past, and the feeds glitched constantly, stuttering, tearing, cutting to static that could last whole minutes. It wasn't so much a security system as it was a weird kind of entertainment. Something to stare at when the woods got too quiet. October always brought trouble. Hunters chasing deer, bored teenagers daring each other, scavengers making one last grab before winter shut everything down. But that Thursday, the 13th, it carried a different weight. Not superstition, exactly, but a physical heaviness in the air, like the world itself had gone slightly out of alignment. By 9 o'clock, the fog had rolled in thick, suffocating. The world outside my trailer shrank to the dull yellow glow of my porch light. Even the river went silent, smothered under that dense, wet air. Around 10, I did my first patrol, walked the fence line, checked the frozen locks, passed the turbine hall, and looped back to the gate. Everything was tight. Everything was right where it should be. The cold smell of rust lingered in the air. But when I stepped back inside, the monitors were still flickering. 3 showed nothing but the empty yard. The 4th, the one aimed at the front gate, made my stomach drop into a pit of ice. The gate stood wide open. The padlock dangled loose on the chain, swinging gently back and forth. I had just checked it. I knew, without a doubt, it had been locked. I grabbed my heavy flashlight, the only thing that gave me even a shred of comfort, and stepped outside. Wet gravel crunched under my boots, and the beam of light cut into the fog so thick it only made things worse, blinding me with a wall of white. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from confusion, doubt clawing at the edges of reason. A professional mistake? A cruel prank? As I neared the gate, my confusion deepened. Everything was fine again. The chain was tight, the lock closed, cold and solid in my hand. I stood there like an idiot, trying to convince myself the cheap camera had just glitched. And then I saw them. Footprints. A single line pressed deep into the mud, leading from the gate toward the drainage ditch. Sharp, defined, too fresh to be old. The kind of prints you'd see if someone had walked by just seconds ago. I followed them, each step through the fog loud as a gunshot. They went 20, maybe 25 paces, then stopped, right at the edge of the ditch. And that was it. No scuffle, no turn, no continuation. Just gone, like whoever made them had vanished mid-step, dissolved into the freezing mist. The rational part of my brain refused to move, frozen in disbelief. Then my radio crackled to life. Victor. Just my name. Nothing else. No static. No background noise. The voice wasn't one I recognized, but it was so clear it froze my blood. I stood straight, breath caught in my throat. The sound was too clean, too flat, like someone had recorded me saying my own name and was playing it back through the radio. It wasn't a greeting. It was a confirmation. Cold. Mechanical. I pressed the button and tried to answer. Yeah. Who's on shift? Silence. Just the low hum of open air. Back in the trailer, my hands were shaking so hard I nearly dropped the 4th camera's recording. The footage glitched with streaks of static, but right before I stepped outside, something flickered at the edge of the frame. A faint shape, gray, moving. It slid from the gate, the locked gate, toward the old control building. No flashlight, no reflection, just a silhouette, walking slowly, deliberately, across the yard. The next camera caught it for barely 2 seconds. My height, my stride. It wasn't sneaking, it was imitating. A perfect copy occupying my space. I couldn't pretend I hadn't seen it. I took the flashlight again and crossed the yard. The fog had thinned just enough to reveal the sharp, warped outline of the control building. The closer I got, the stronger the metallic smell became. The heavy chain on the double doors was stretched tight, too tight, and the steel padlock was bent grotesquely into an L shape, as if crushed by something inhumanly strong. One door hung slightly ajar. "Security," I barked. "If someone's in there, come out." Nothing. Only a faint hiss, maybe my own breath, echoing back from the dark, and I pushed the door open and stepped inside. My flashlight beam sliced through layers of dust. The air was cold enough to bite, carrying a faint scent of burned plastic. Then I stopped. Right there. In the center of the concrete floor, someone had arranged a perfect circle out of smooth, black river stones. Inside it sat a lump of melted copper, warped, fused into a single solid mass. It looked recent, fresh. When I crouched to inspect it, the metal was still warm. The radio hissed again. "Victor," it said, a third time, slower now, drawn out. And this time, there was no doubt. It was my voice. It felt like something had ripped my soul out, fed it through a wire, and played it back to me. I just stood there, staring at the radio, desperate for some rational explanation. Then, from deep inside the shadows of the building, came footsteps, measured, even, exactly my pace. I swung the flashlight down the hallway. A man stood there. He wore my uniform, my jacket, my boots, my ID badge clipped to his chest, his head tilted sideways, chin nearly touching shoulder, an angle that no living person could hold. He didn't speak. He just started walking toward me. With each of his steps, the radio screamed louder. The static wasn't random anymore. It had rhythm. A heavy, labored breathing forced through a wire. The closer he came, the thicker the air became, pressing down on my chest and teeth with unbearable weight. I stepped back once, then again. He kept coming. He didn't speak, but his very existence was a threat, something that tore at the edges of who I was. He didn't need force. His presence alone was enough to unmake me. I let the flashlight slip from my hand. The beam spun wildly across the concrete floor, catching his shadow for the briefest moment, a shadow that didn't quite match the shape of his body, before the light died, plunging everything into cold, absolute darkness. I ran. The hallway stretched on forever, twisting into a metallic labyrinth of dust and ruin. Every door, every corner looked the same, a nightmare loop designed to drain the last of my strength. My breath rasped in my ears, thin and desperate. I slammed through a set of double doors so hard they burst open, stumbling into the freezing night air, not stopping until my hands hit the familiar side of my truck. As I fumbled with the keys, my radio hissed one final time. Through the wall of static, my own voice whispered, soft and cold, "The gate's open." I turned toward the yard. The tall chain-link gate, the one I knew had been locked just minutes ago, was now swinging wide, slowly, deliberately, through the fog. The chain still hung neatly on the post. The padlock was gone. I left it that way. I didn't get out. I didn't check. I didn't lock a damn thing. I hit the gas, and the truck roared through the valley, the fog parting in waves like a pale, ghostly sea. I didn't slow down until the first bar of cell signal flickered to life, proof that civilization still existed somewhere beyond those hills. That was the last shift I ever worked. The next morning, the security company reported the site as secure. They said the chain on the control building door had been damaged strangely, blamed it on sudden gusts of wind. I never told them about the shadow, the footprints, or the voice, because really, who would believe a night guard who lost his own identity to a ghost? I still hear my name sometimes, in moments of perfect silence, or when I jolt awake before dawn, and it sounds exactly like me. The same tone, the same pitch, but without the soul behind it. I changed jobs, changed cities, but I can't outrun the truth. Something out there is still wearing my old uniform, and it has my name now, Victor. If that thing isn't me, if it's some kind of mirror self, or a mountain-born spirit fed by isolation and greed, then the worst part isn't that it wanted to kill me. The worst part is this: how did it get my voice and memories so perfectly right? And that circle of stones, that lump of molten copper, maybe they were part of a ritual. something ancient, something that let it cross over, to anchor itself here. I know I ran. I know I escaped. But every time I hear that whisper calling my name, one question claws at me. Did I really escape? Or did I just leave behind an empty shell for it to finally become real? That October, I wandered into a place people called Dalton's Crossing. To be honest, it was barely a town, more like a forgotten smudge on the map. If you blinked while driving through, you'd miss it entirely. A handful of faded old houses, a gas station that closed before sundown, and a single stoplight blinking lonely red through the night. Just past that stoplight, about a mile down a wooded road, stood the Dalton Lodge, an old-fashioned inn built from massive logs, its walls pressed so close by the forest that the black skeletal branches seemed to lean down over the roof, hungry to drag the whole place back into the wild. The air there was always heavy, thick with the smell of damp soil, rotting leaves, and old pine sap. The scent of isolation, of time standing still. The owner, Eli, was a man carved from the same rough timber as his lodge, stoic, leathery, and hollow-eyed. His hands looked like tree bark, and his voice carried the rasp of cold mountain air. It's simple work, and he told me, leaning on the counter. Mostly truckers and hunters this time of year. Keep the coffee hot and the lights dim. That's all. He paid in cash, asked no questions, and offered no paperwork. I didn't care. I was broke, drifting, and too tired to keep moving. If I'd known why none of the previous clerks lasted more than a week, I'd have walked out that very night. But desperation has a way of dulling your instincts. The first night passed in near-perfect silence. I settled into the dull rhythm quickly, sweeping the porch, refilling the soda machine, checking in 2 weary travelers, and jotting idle notes into a small ledger. The lodge had only 6 rooms, arranged in a neat line, each with its own wooden door opening to the gravel lot. The office was cramped but oddly cozy, lit by a yellowed lamp and scented faintly of coffee and old floor cleaner. It had that nostalgic, false sense of safety you shouldn't trust but do anyway. By midnight, I was completely lulled by the quiet. I logged meaningless details just to mark the time. Car passed at 12:12. Coffee's cold again. Nothing out of the ordinary. Then came the second night. A little before 10, a blinding glare swept across the office window. An old pickup rattled into the lot, its engine coughing like it was on its last breath. The man who stepped out was tall, broad-shouldered, his gray jacket caked with dried mud. He didn't look at me. He just walked in, laid a folded stack of bills on the counter, and said, "Room?" His voice was deep and slow, mountain-born, but there was a tautness to it, like every word scraped his throat raw. I handed him the key to room 4. He gave me a fleeting, empty smile, then turned away. "Sorry. Could you sign the guest log?" I asked. He paused. For a moment, he stared at the pen like it was something vile. Then he turned and walked out without touching it. The brass bell above the door rang once, just once, and its lonely chime lingered in the air long after he was gone. That was the first moment the quiet stopped feeling safe. The next morning, Eli showed up with fresh supplies and a new thermos of coffee. I told him right away about the man from the night before, expecting some kind of reasonable explanation. But Eli just frowned, puzzled. He went straight to the key rack and checked every hook. All the keys were there, including the heavy metal tag for room 4. Eli turned back slowly, his eyes sharp as a blade. "That room's been shut down for years," he said flatly. "Floor's rotten from a burst pipe. No one stays there." I tried to explain that I'd seen the man, that I'd handed him the key myself. Eli just shook his head, said I must have mixed up the numbers, but I knew I hadn't. I could still see that cold, hollow smile. More than that, I remembered the muddy footprints he'd left on the office floor. They were gone now, wiped clean. The key had been given away. The footprints were there, and yet Eli swore the room was empty. That contradiction was the first crack in my sanity. By the third night, the silence no longer felt peaceful. It pressed in, thick, deliberate, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. Out here, in this forgotten mountain stretch, the dark seemed heavier, more physical, like a weight pushing down on the frail wooden walls. After 9, the road outside went dead. No engines, no headlights, nothing but the deep, ringing stillness. Around 9:30, something finally broke that stillness. I was reviewing the ledger when I heard the front door creak open. The little brass bell chimed once, soft and hesitant. I looked up. No one was there. But the air had turned ice cold, that sudden kind of cold that feels alive, like something unseen has just stepped out of the dark and into the room. The door eased shut by itself, and the bell swayed, slow and mournful. I grabbed the old flashlight and stepped outside. Under the flickering porch light, wet footprints glistened across the wooden boards, long strides, leading straight into the gravel lot, and then they stopped. Midway across the stones, they simply ended. No car, no tire tracks, nothing to show anyone had come or gone. The prints still shimmered damply under the yellow light, though the night air was bone dry. When I stumbled back inside, my notebook was lying open on the desk. I hadn't left it there. On the last page, written in shaky, uneven strokes, were 2 words that froze me in place. Night 3. I tried to tell myself it was a cruel joke, maybe Eli's idea of a test, but the handwriting was wrong. Crude, twisted, and trembling, as if written in pain. The ink wasn't black either. It was a ghostly gray, like it had been scratched out with something long dead. The message wasn't for Eli, it was for me. Around 11, the phone rang. The sound ripped through the quiet, making me jump. I picked up, forcing my voice steady. Dalton Lodge, how can I help you? What came back was a hoarse whisper, rough and broken, like stone grinding against stone. Room 4 is leaking again. Then nothing. Just a few seconds of crackling static, and the line went dead. The old system could glitch, sure, but the specificity of those words, leaking again, when there hadn't been rain in days, shattered any attempt at reasons, driven by a sick mix of fear and curiosity. I took the spare key for room 4. I started down the dim corridor, each hesitant step making the floorboards groan louder, matching the pounding in my chest. Halfway there, the air shifted, colder, denser, like walking into a sealed crypt. The door to room 4 stood slightly ajar. A faint, sickly light bled through the crack. I pushed gently. The light flickered once, violently, and died. Water poured from the bathroom faucet, spilling over the yellowed sink, pooling across the warped floor. I stepped closer, my boots splashing in the freezing puddle. Then I saw it. Scrawled across the fogged mirror, drawn by a desperate finger, were the words, "No more nights." I turned and bolted. My foot caught on a suitcase I'd never seen before. When I looked up, the hallway wasn't the same. It stretched on far beyond the 6 doors it should have had, each door receding into deeper darkness. The air buzzed faintly, charged with angry static. I didn't walk. I ran, straight for the office light. When I burst through the door, the cash drawer was open, the guest log was gone. And though the door was locked tight behind me, the little brass bell above it kept swinging, slowly, as if someone invisible had just walked through. I barricaded myself inside the office, locking the front door with shaking hands. But even that last refuge had been breached. The cash drawer was pulled open, nothing stolen, Yet the guest log was gone, and though the door was bolted, the brass bell above it swayed gently, slowly, as if something unseen had just passed through the wood and slipped back into the dark. I huddled behind the counter, crouched under the flickering yellow light, waiting for dawn. I barely dared to breathe, afraid that even the smallest sound might summon whatever lingered out there. At exactly 7 a.m., Eli arrived, right on time, face as unreadable as ever. I spilled everything, talking so fast my words tripped over themselves. The strange man, the missing key, the footprints, the phone call, the hallway that stretched, the message on the mirror. He listened without interrupting, without mocking. When I finished, my voice cracking, he simply said, in that gravelly tone of his, "So, you've seen him." I stared at him, desperate for some rational story, some local ghost tale that would make this all make sense. Eli poured himself coffee, sat down on the stool, and began to speak. He told me the lodge had once been part of a remote mining settlement back in the 1950s. One stormy night, a miner had rented room 4. He was one of the last still working after the operation had shut down. That night, he went back into the mine to fetch his tools. By morning, a flash flood had swallowed the entire site. His truck was still parked outside the lodge, but he never returned. "Every few years," Eli muttered, staring into his coffee, someone hears him again, complaining about a leak, leaving footprints that go nowhere. Sometimes he even signs the guest book in mud and water. He said no one ever lasted long after that first encounter. I quit on the spot. Before he could finish the sentence, I didn't care about the last paycheck. I just needed to get out of that suffocating place. Eli didn't argue. As I turned to leave, he reached into his pocket and handed me a folded scrap of paper. It was torn from the missing guest log. My name was written neatly in the center, but it wasn't my handwriting, and beneath it, in that same stiff, ghostly gray ink, were 2 words: Night 4. I didn't stay to ask what it meant. I packed my things in under 5 minutes, started the car, and never once looked in the rearview mirror until Dalton's Crossing was nothing but a fading smear behind me. I drove straight through the mountains until they were only a distant line on the horizon. It's been 2 years since that night. 2 years, but the haunting hasn't let go. Every October, right around 10 p.m., the exact hour that man appeared, the phone rings once. The caller ID shows something impossible. Room 4. When I answer, there is only silence, and then, faint but unmistakable, the slow, steady sound of dripping water, just like that leaking faucet in the sealed room. Then the line goes dead. Immediately after, no matter where I am, my apartment fills with a damp, earthy smell, the scent of wet wood and cold soil, the smell of Dalton Lodge. I've changed numbers 3 times, but the calls always find me. Last week, one came through even though the phone was unplugged. I don't tell people anymore. I just wait, listening for the first drop to fall, and try not to think about the terrible possibility that room 4 isn't haunting the lodge anymore. Maybe it's found something better. Maybe it's found a new key. My shift at the ranger station, officially, started at 6 p.m. But by that hour in October, the mountains had already been swallowed whole. I don't mean dark. I mean consumed. That kind of darkness doesn't fall. It arrives. There's no sunset, no warning. You just blink, and the outline of the tree line, the one you saw a second ago, is gone. The Appalachians this time of year are unnervingly quiet. Not peaceful quiet, but the kind that feels compressed, heavy, as if the hills themselves are holding something in, and the weight of it is pressing down from every direction. Of course, tourists still linger around. They chase the last scraps of fall color, stop at overlooks, and ask the same 5 tired questions about the leaves. But once the sun dips, the park empties in a way that feels wrong. No cars in the lots, no voices on the trails, just the trees, the creeping cold, and whatever, or whoever, doesn't mind being alone out there. That night, I wasn't even supposed to be on duty. Ben, my partner, called off last minute. Said it was food poisoning, but it could have been burnout. We've all been there. Since I lived nearby, I told dispatch I'd cover for him. They handed me Miller's Ridge. My gut tightened. Miller's Ridge was a back road we always locked up after Labor Day. It's too eroded, too steep in places, and more importantly, it's a dead zone. 0 cell signal. But the gate key was still hanging on the hook, which meant it was due for a check. I grabbed the standard flashlight, a nearly empty first aid kit, and a radio that, in that part of the park, might as well have been a paperweight. The last log entry from 3 nights ago read, "Routine patrol. No activity." I parked, locked the truck, and stepped out. The cold was already waiting. Not the kind that bites. It seeps. Damp, sneaky cold that slides down your sleeves and settles in your bones before you realize you're shivering. I logged the start time and began the climb. The trail was narrow and mean, forgotten after summer ended. In some stretches, tree roots broke through the soil, tangled across the path, like the ribcage of some buried giant. In others, the incline clawed at my calves, a cruel reminder I wasn't as young as I used to be. I wasn't looking for trouble, just trying to get it over with, sweeping the beam of my flashlight through the brush, hearing nothing but my own breathing. And then, about 15 minutes in, I saw it, off to the left, maybe 50 yards deep into the trees, where nothing should have been. A faint, flickering orange light. A campfire, or at least, what was left of one. The campfire was small, dying, but definitely not cold. That meant someone had been here. Recently. Thing is, no camping permits had been issued for this area in weeks. My radio was dead. I was alone. And I'd deliberately gone off the main trail, following signs of an illegal camper. Every nerve in my body, every bit of training I'd ever had, was screaming this was a bad idea. But the fire was real, which made it my responsibility. I followed the smell of smoke. Not thick smoke, just a thin, sour trail of burning wet wood that clings to everything it touches. I moved as quietly as I could, controlling every step, brushing aside low branches one by one. The clearing wasn't large, and it sure wasn't natural. It didn't look like a campsite, more like someone had torn the brush out with their bare hands, just enough space to sit down. The first thing my flashlight caught was the fire ring, a rough circle of river stones, still steaming faintly in the cold night air. Beside it, an old backpack, stained and filthy, slumped against a tree. The zipper was rusted, jammed halfway shut. Next to it, a rolled-up sleeping bag, stiff and shiny with grease and grime. The kind of thing your instincts tell you not to touch. Like it hadn't seen clean water since before I was born. And then, right next to it, stabbed straight down into the hard dirt, was a knife. Not a hunting knife, not a survival blade, a standard 8-inch kitchen knife. The kind you'd use to chop vegetables. Except this one looked like it had been used to chop something very different. I bent down, my light sweeping across the ground. The blade caught the beam, gleaming far too clean. That's when I called out. My voice sounded strange, too loud against the heavy silence. "Hey, Ranger here. You're not in trouble, but you can't camp overnight out here." At first, nothing. Just the hum of blood in my ears. Then, from somewhere at the edge of the dark, where my flashlight couldn't quite reach, a man stepped forward. He could have been 30, maybe 40, hard to tell. His face was hollow, cheeks sunken, the look of someone who'd been outdoors too long, or gone without too much for too many nights. His skin was pale, tight over his jaw, like old parchment about to tear. He slowly raised both hands, palms out, a gesture that might have been meant to reassure me, if he looked even slightly worried or afraid. "Didn't mean to startle you," he said. His voice was light, a little high, not threatening, just there. I asked if he was just passing through. He shook his head slowly. "Just resting," he said. "Been walking a long time. Needed a quiet place to stop, and I asked about a permit." He smiled, barely, just a twitch at the corner of his mouth. "Don't think I need one anymore," he said. "Most of this land isn't really parkland anymore these days." That froze me for a moment. "What do you mean? Not really?" I asked. He glanced around, then up at the trees, like he was studying every leaf. "You don't hear them?" he asked. "I don't," I said. He nodded, as if that was the only answer that made sense. "Then you're still new." Right then, my radio screeched. A single burst of static, sharp and violent, loud enough to make me jump. Then silence. I grabbed it, pressed the button, tried to call it in. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Quang at Miller's Ridge. I'm with a 1096. Nothing. Dead air." He watched me, calm, too calm, like he already knew that would happen. I told him he couldn't stay, that we'd walk back to the truck together and sort it out in the morning. He nodded slowly, almost agreeable, then said, "You should tell the others to stop following me." I froze, my hand still tight on the useless radio. "What others?" I asked. He pointed, not at me, but past me, toward the trail I'd come from. "The pretenders," he said. "They follow people like you, people who walk alone." He stepped closer. That's when I noticed. His feet made no sound. The ground was covered in dry leaves and twigs, but there wasn't a single crunch. He smiled again, not with malice, not with warmth, just empty. "You don't always know who's real," he said. "You have to check. You have to look underneath." His eyes flicked down, to the kitchen knife still buried in the dirt. I followed his gaze without thinking. He chuckled softly. "Oh, no, not for you," what he said. "You're still intact? But some of them," he paused, his voice lowering to a whisper. "They change when the sun goes down. The skin doesn't fit right anymore." A chill ran down my spine, but it wasn't the chill of October. I tried to keep calm, offered to call someone for him, a rescue station, a relative. He only shook his head, eyes empty. "Can't go back to town?" he whispered. "They're waiting for me there." "Who's they?" I asked. He looked straight through me, into the heavy darkness behind my back. "They built that town in the wrong place," he said. "They forgot what used to sleep beneath it." The way he said it, it wasn't the rambling of a madman. It was a statement, flat, certain, like stone underfoot. I stepped back, without meaning to. His eyes locked onto mine. "You think I'm crazy?" he asked. I didn't answer. He crouched down slowly, his thin fingers brushing the hard dirt beside the knife, gently, like he was stroking a pet. "Crazy," he murmured, "is just the name they give you, right before you start to change." Then he looked up, and in a voice so soft it almost sounded kind, he said, "You should go, before they notice you." I asked if he was planning to stay there. "For a while," he said. "I like when new people find me. It reminds me what real faces used to look like." And I turned away, forced myself to walk, not run. I didn't hear him follow. I didn't need to. I could feel his gaze, heavy on the back of my neck, following me step by step, until the trail curved, and I was finally out of sight. That's when I ran. I ran as fast as I could. Branches whipped against my face and arms. My breath caught, cold and burning in my chest. When I reached the truck, my hands were shaking so hard I couldn't fit the key into the lock. Dropped it twice on the gravel. Swore under my breath, gasping for air. Finally got inside, slammed the doors, locked everything, turned the ignition. Almost without thinking, I grabbed the radio one last time. And still static. But then, through the static, for just a heartbeat, a voice came through, clear as if he were sitting in the back seat. "Hello." Then nothing. I floored the gas pedal, raced out of the park like hell itself was chasing me. The headlights swept through the trees on both sides, and I swear they looked closer together, like they'd moved, closing in around the trail I'd just escaped. And when I hit the highway, my phone lit up. Missed calls, messages from dispatch, all at once. I called back, told them I was fine. Lied. Said it was just radio interference. Never mentioned the man. Never mentioned the knife. And I sure as hell didn't mention the way he talked about skin that doesn't quite fit anymore. By morning, reason caught up with me. I told my supervisor everything. She sent a team out to Miller's Ridge. They found the clearing, the fire ring, still warm. But no sleeping bag, no backpack, no knife. Only a single line of footprints leading straight toward the ridge. Problem was, the ridge ends in a dead drop, a landslide, a steep cliff face. The prints stopped right at the edge. No sign of a slip, no drag marks. They just ended. They closed the case, filed it as transient camper, temporary stay. No further investigation. But since then, every year, when I'm assigned to patrol that trail, the fire ring is always there. Same clearing, always new, always warm, but never burning. One year, I found an open can of beans. Empty, but spotless. Like it had just been washed. Another year, I found footprints. My own boot prints from the week before, and bare footprints of someone else, circling the fire twice, then standing side by side with mine. Last October, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned fast, nothing there. But just at the edge of my vision, deep in the trees, a lantern flickered, moving slowly. It stopped when I stopped, then went out. And 2 nights ago, driving back to town after my shift, I saw him again. Same face, same slow walk, just calmly strolling along the side of the highway, like nothing had changed. He lifted one hand, not to wave, naime, just to acknowledge me. I didn't stop, didn't even dare a second glance. But I did look in the rearview mirror, and there was something else, something right behind my truck, moving at exactly my speed. It wasn't running. It just kept pace. Even as the road curved, even through the trees, it never fell behind, never stumbled, just kept walking, steady, like it knew every turn by heart. When I finally reached the diner, the only one open 24 hours in town, I parked right under the brightest streetlight I could find. And I just sat there, eyes locked on the road, until the sun came up. I've never told anyone about that night. Not my supervisor, not the debrief team, not even my family. To this day, it remains sealed away. My shift at the ranger station always starts before dawn, in that strange, dead hour when the world can't decide whether to wake or slip back into oblivion. I pulled into the empty lot, the gravel crunching under my tires, the sound dull and lonely in the cold air. Next to me sat my half-cold thermos of coffee and my old gear bag, rattling softly with every bump. It was early November, tourist season long gone. No hikers, barely any calls, which meant more quiet, but not the peaceful kind. This quiet was empty, heavy, the kind that feels like even the air itself is holding its breath. That morning, The work log had just one anomaly, a single transmission, cut through the static at exactly 4:03 a.m. A woman's voice, faint but unnervingly clear. "I'm lost. I can't find the trail. Please respond." That was it. The recording repeated once more. Same tone, same words, then cut off abruptly into total silence. We sometimes get prank calls, stray radio interference bouncing off towers, kids with new transmitters testing their luck. But this one was too sharp to ignore. It didn't sound like a cry for help. It sounded like a statement of fact. And it came with coordinates. The ping landed in a part of the forest we'd practically abandoned, a mess of old-growth trees and brush that hadn't seen a public trail in decades. Sometimes we used it for controlled burns or training exercises, but never for routine patrol. It just existed. Normally, I'd forward something that vague to Central Dispatch and let them handle it. But the location was only a few miles off my route. And honestly, the suffocating silence that morning had started to crawl under my skin. So I told myself I'd check it out, prove it was just some glitch, and be back before noon. I printed the coordinates, tossed a few extra water bottles and supplies into my pack, and drove down an old service road. It ended abruptly, swallowed by a wall of trees so dense it looked almost deliberate. I parked by a rusted gate, chained shut, and went on foot. Past the gate, the trail narrowed, if you could even call it that. Barely passable. I had to duck beneath branches heavy with dew, slip through mud that sucked at my boots, and check my compass every few minutes just to stay on course. The fog hung thick between the hills, dense, motionless, almost alive. It pressed against me, swallowing sound. Even the birds were silent. The only noise was the wet crunch of my boots over decaying leaves. I kept replaying the recording through my earpiece, over and over. Her voice stuck in my head. She didn't sound panicked, didn't sound lost, even. Her tone was deliberate, like she'd said those same words hundreds of times before. "Sah." It was the kind of calm that chills you to the bone, the kind you only hear right before someone decides to let go. After a few hours, the ground began to slope upward, steep enough that I had to slow down, testing every step on slicked and moss-covered stone. That's when I found the first sign. A single footprint. Small, narrow, and impossibly fresh. Pressed deep into the damp moss beside a twisted tree root. It was a woman's size, no doubt. And right next to it, caught on a broken branch, was a torn piece of bright yellow paracord, frayed at the edges, like it had been ripped from a backpack strap. My heart skipped a beat. This wasn't a false alarm. Someone had been out here. I did exactly what I was trained to do. I sealed the cord in an evidence bag, marked the coordinates on my GPS, and keyed my radio. "Station, this is Ranger 3. I've got a positive trace at the target coordinates. Continuing on foot." Silence, then a brief hiss of static, and nothing. I switched frequencies. Still nothing. Pulled out my personal phone. No service. Not even a single bar. That didn't make sense. I was well within range. I had literally gotten a text an hour ago. Back at the trailhead. I even raised the phone above my head, waving it around like an idiot, hoping for just a flicker of signal. Dead. That's when the cold started creeping in. Not the November chill. Something else. Something deeper. I turned to head back. Maybe climb to higher ground and try the radio again. But the trail behind me was gone. Completely gone. Not covered, not overgrown. Gone. The forest floor had shifted somehow. Or maybe there had never been a real trail at all. I froze, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I looked around, trying to recall the landmarks I'd passed, but everything looked the same. Trees, rocks, mist, more trees. I dropped to one knee, trying to steady myself, laid out my compass and map. The needle was trembling, violently, like it was afraid. It spun from north to east, then began to rotate lazily in full circles. I tapped the glass. Nothing. Tried to reset it. Still spinning. At first, I laughed, a nervous little chuckle. Okay, that's funny. But after a few more minutes of watching it dance like that, my stomach tightened. I was completely disoriented. I tied a strip of bright orange survey tape to a nearby branch, a clear marker. Then I picked a direction, west, I guessed, and started walking again, marking trees every few minutes. I'm a professional, I told myself. This is what I do. Nearly an hour later, I stepped into a clearing, and there it was. The same moss-covered tree root, the same footprint, the same torn yellow cord, half buried in the dirt where I'd left it. My blood ran cold. I thought maybe I'd looped back somehow, so I turned to check for my markers. Nothing. No orange tape, no footprints, no trail behind me at all. I could have sworn I'd been walking in a straight line, but the forest didn't seem to care about straight lines anymore. The light had changed, too. Not darker, exactly, just dimmer. Like the sun was being smothered by something thick and gray, even though the sky was perfectly clear. My watch said it was just past noon. But everything around me looked like dusk, a dead, frozen evening. I gave up trying to find my way back. I set up a temporary shelter, stretched my tarp between two trees, and laid out the emergency beacon. I turned it on. A soft electronic beep filled the air, then silence. And then her voice, clearer now, coming through my beacon. "Don't walk anymore," she said. "I tried that. It just loops." Her tone was calm, resigned, like she was offering advice she'd learned the hard way. I pressed the mic, my hands shaking. "What's your name? Who are you?" The reply cracked with static, broken and warped. I caught only a single syllable. "Marin." Maybe. Then silence again. That night, I didn't sleep. The beacon kept turning itself back on, 3 times, at least, after I'd powered it down. Each time, it created a new log entry on my GPS, claiming I'd moved miles away, north, then south, though I hadn't moved an inch from my tarp. I finally wrapped the damn thing in aluminum foil, just in case something was interfering with the signal. Didn't help. By dawn, 12 new coordinates had appeared. I kept moving after that, slower this time. I didn't trust my sense of direction anymore. I didn't trust my gear. I didn't even trust the ground beneath my feet. Sometime late in the morning, I stumbled into a small clearing, a place I was sure I'd never seen before. At first, I thought that might be one of our old training camps. But nothing here looked remotely recent. A green 2-person tent sagged to one side, half collapsed. A silver emergency blanket still stretched tight between 2 trees, fluttering faintly in the dim lights. Inside the tent, the scene was wrong. Clothes, neatly folded. Too neatly. A rosary wrapped twice around a pair of rolled-up socks. 2 empty lighters, and a small black notebook. I opened it. On the very first page, in faded blue ink, was a name, Marin. The entries were dated only by month. July, no year, but from the handwriting and the yellowed paper, it had been here a long, long time. I flipped to the last page. The final line was shaky, but perfectly legible. "Please tell him I stayed where I was told to." I slowly backed out of the tent. There was something about this place, not just abandoned, preserved, watched. That's when I noticed the fire rings, 2 of them. One old, blackened, crusted with soot, cold for years. The other, new. The ash was gray, still damp. When I held my hand over it, I could feel the warmth. My skin prickled all over. There were no footprints around it. No scuff marks. Not a single disturbed leaf. It was just there, as if someone had snuffed it out and stepped backward into the airs. I pulled out my GPS to mark the coordinates, to log the impossible. Error. The screen flickered, flashed a mess of garbled numbers, then rebooted, agonizingly slow. When it finally came back, the display showed the date. October 14th, 2 years in the future. I just stared at it, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. I reset the device, tried to correct the time. It flashed again, violently, then went dark. A knot twisted in my gut. When I looked up, the silver blanket was gone. Just gone. The tent was still there, but the ground beneath it looked different, freshly packed, level, as if someone had just filled it in. The shallow indent where I'd been kneeling was gone too. I turned, ready to leave, to run. That's when I saw movement, a flicker off to my right. A shape. It didn't walk. It didn't sway. It just stood there, perfectly still, between two pine trees. I stared straight at it, and then it was gone. In its place, a narrow trail had appeared, fresh, like it had always been there. I followed it. Didn't think, didn't care where it led. The trees began to thin. The canopy opened, and then I saw it, the valley below, and the roof of the ranger station, catching sunlight like a beacon. Relief hit me so hard it almost hurt. I could barely breathe. Then my radio clicked. Her voice again. Closer now. Clearer. Like she was standing right beside me. "You'll see me when you stop walking." I froze, held my breath, turned around. 10 paces behind me, tucked into a shallow dip in the ground I swear hadn't been there before, was another tent. Same shape, same color, same silver blanket, tied in the exact same way. The flap was open, and inside was my gear. My backpack, my half-full water bottle, my notebook, opened to a blank page, and my radio, the one that should have been inside my pack, sitting on top, still transmitting. I didn't scream. I just moved. I grabbed my pack and I ran. I didn't think, didn't look back. Branches tore at my arms and face. Mud sucked at my boots. I slipped, fell, bled, but I didn't stop. Not until my soles hit the hard, blessed crunch of gravel. The road. My truck. I climbed in, slammed the door, locked it, and sat there for 5 whole minutes, just breathing. The radio hissed once, a soft pop of static, then went dead. When I got back to the outpost, the wall clock was wrong. An hour fast. My supervisor looked pale when he saw me. He said I'd been gone nearly 24 hours. The truck logs showed no movement. My phone had never connected to a tower. They asked where I'd been. All I could say was, "I'm not sure." The next morning, search and rescue went out, using the last known coordinates from my GPS. They found nothing. No tent, no blanket, no fire rings, just 2 sets of footprints, both mine. One leading west, one leading east. They met at that same mossy route and then just stopped. I filed the report, a vague, cleaned-up version, signed it, and turned it in. But before I left, I had to check. I logged into the station's radio archive. The original transmission, the woman's call at 4:03 a.m., was still there, still looping. Only now the timestamp read October 14th, next year. I deleted it, shut everything down, locked the station. Then I drove all the way to the highway overlook, parked by the ridge, and I never went back. My cousin Mason had just moved in with us. With our cramped 2-bedroom trailer, that basically meant he officially claimed the couch. His mom had just remarried a guy named Carl, and Mason didn't just dislike him, he despised him. He said Carl was one of those fake nice types. The kind of guy who always smiles but never really blinks. Like a lizard in a polo shirt. Right after the wedding, Mason stuffed his clothes into a duffel bag and told his mom he'd rather sleep on our floor than under Carl's roof. And that was that. He was 17, restless, twitchy, and always on edge. He acted like he wasn't afraid of anything. The kind of kid who'd walk through a graveyard at midnight, not because he was brave, but because he needed to prove something to someone. But you could tell he wasn't fearless. He just hated boredom. And out here, boredom was the only thing we had plenty of. We lived out by Calvert Creek, tucked deep in the hills, where the pavement gives up pretending and turns into mud and gravel. The place used to be a mining town, but the company packed up decades ago, leaving behind rusted machinery and half-eaten forests. Everyone around here knows the creek still glimmers with strange colors after a hard rain, like an oil slick, a chemical rainbow nobody talks about. It was early October, that weird in-between season, the air cooling down, but the leaves still undecided about changing color. I remember that morning because Mason came back from a walk in the woods, looking more tense and shaken than I'd ever seen him, and he said he'd found something. Not an old shack or a busted-up truck, something strange. He told me there were stairs out there, stone stairs, carved straight into a slope near the old quarry. He said they didn't lead anywhere. They just stopped, halfway up the hill, like whoever built them got tired, or got taken, and never finished. Then he said, when he stood on them, he could feel this low, vibrating hum, not in his ears, but in his teeth, in his fillings, and I laughed it off, told him it was probably the foundation of some old pump station collapsing. Plenty of junk like that out there. But Mason just shook his head, eyes wide. No, it's not like that. They're not attached to anything, not built into the ground. They're just there, like someone dropped them from the sky. He didn't have pictures, left his phone charging at home, but he swore he could take me there. So that afternoon, like an idiot, I said yes. We packed a thermos of apple cider, grabbed an old crank flashlight from the shed, and headed out. The woods behind the quarry weren't friendly. The path narrowed quick, twisting between blackened trunks and slick roots that looked like veins clawing through the dirt. Mason moved like he'd done it 100 times, while I stumbled behind, trying not to fall. We passed all kinds of junk, half a fridge, 2 rusted-out cars, a tire swing with no rope. Once, we came across a circle of stones, charred black from fire. The sour, acrid smell of something burned, but not wood, still hung in the air. After about 40 minutes, Mason stopped. There, he said, pointing. The stairs looked wrong. My brain took a few seconds to even process what I was seeing. 8 steps, made of some weird, pale stone. Too perfect, too smooth, edges sharp despite the moss growing over them. They sat there on the hillside, unattached to anything above or below. See, Mason whispered, they don't go anywhere. I crouched down, tapped the bottom step with my boot. Solid, cold, colder than the air around it. Then I saw it. On the 3rd step, a squirrel. Still, perfectly still, but it didn't look dead. Not in any normal way. No blood, no decay. Its body was loose, relaxed, like it had just decided to stop breathing. Mason swore it hadn't been there yesterday. He picked up a pine cone and tossed it. It bounced twice, click, click, and rolled to a stop. Nothing happened. Of course, Mason had to try it himself. That reckless streak was back. He hopped up to the top step, grinning down at me. Feel anything? No, I said, my throat tight. He shifted his weight. It's, vibrating, he muttered, grin fading. Under my feet. He laughed once, a short, uneasy sound, then stepped down 1 stair, then another. By the 5th step, he froze. His whole expression changed. He looked pale, disoriented. Hey, I called, stomach twisting. You okay? He looked up at me, but his eyes were empty, unfocused. You don't feel it? he asked softly. I shook my head. He smiled again, crooked, unnatural. Then he said, "Watch this." He stepped down onto the 8th step, the last one, and he was gone. Just gone. In a blink. Where he'd been standing, there was nothing. Nothing but cold, empty air. I lunged forward, heart pounding so hard it felt like it might tear out of my chest. The air where Mason had been standing, it was cold, heavy, like I'd just stepped through a dead patch of air. I scrambled around the hill, clawing through the dirt and leaves, praying I'd find a hole, a trapdoor, something. But there was nothing. No dip in the ground, no gap, just damp soil and silence. I screamed his name, over and over, until my throat burned raw. But the forest just swallowed my voice whole and gave me back nothing but that horrible, still quiet. I ran down the steps myself, stomping hard, half expecting the ground to cave in beneath me, or that strange vibration to come back, but nothing. They were just stone, solid, cold, indifferent. I ran, not along the path. I cut straight through the woods, branches whipping my face, tearing at my sleeves. Mom was standing on the porch when I burst out of the tree line. Her face twisted in shock the moment she saw me. When I tried to explain, babbling about the stairs, about Mason just vanishing, she went quiet. Not the kind of quiet that says, "I understand." The kind that says, "You're scaring me." That night, my uncle came over. He listened, nodded, then clapped a hand on my shoulder. He said Mason probably just took off again, that the kid had wild blood, that he'd done this before. "He'll come back when he's hungry," he said. They boxed up my terror, sealed it neatly inside something called teenage rebellion. But I knew the truth. I was there. That night, I sat by the window, staring out at the jagged black line of trees. Around 1 in the morning, something moved. Just a shadow, too fast to be a person, too big to be a deer's. I told myself it was a deer. I whispered it like a prayer. The next day, I skipped the bus. I couldn't go to school. Couldn't pretend algebra mattered when my cousin had been erased from reality. I grabbed Mason's hoodie off the couch and one of my uncle's old metal hunting lanterns. I had to go back. Even terrified, I had to know, or at least prove I was wrong. The trail felt longer this time, heavier. Every sound felt sharper, meaner. A snapping branch sounded like bone breaking. A crow's wings tore through the air like fabric ripping. My hands were shaking so bad. I gripped the lantern until my knuckles went white. When I reached the hill, I froze. They weren't the same. Yesterday, there were 8 steps. Today, I counted 13. I counted again, then again, my finger trembling as I pointed at each one. 13. There were 5 more, and they looked different, darker, too clean. Like someone had scrubbed the moss away and polished them with something slick and sticky. I just stood there, my mind screaming, "Run," but my body refusing to move. And that's when I heard it. My name, not shouted, spoken softly, like a question. It was Mason's voice, but wrong, slow, distorted, like it was being played through a fan or bubbling up from the bottom of a lake. I spun toward the sound, swinging the lantern's beam across the trees. Something was crawling, low to the ground. It was wearing Mason's jacket. For one split second, my heart lifted. "Mason," I called. But then I saw it. The way its arms bent, wrong. Too long at the elbows. It moved in jerks, like an insect. It slid behind a fallen log, peeked over, then crawled closer. The lantern light caught its face. It almost looked like Mason. Same jawline, same eyes. But the skin, God, the skin. It was pale and waxy, like melted candle wax cooled into layers. Its eyes blinked out of sync, one, then the other, too slow. And when its mouth opened, no sound came out. No breath, Just a long, silent stretch of jaw, like it was trying to remember how to speak, like it was rehearsing the shape of a word. That thing crawled to the base of the steps. It stopped, tilted its head, like a dog listening. Then, very slowly, it placed one waxy hand on the bottom step. That was enough. I turned and ran. Didn't look back. Branches tore my sleeves, mud splattered my legs, and when I finally saw the dull shimmer of the trailer in the distance, my chest felt like it was going to burst. I stumbled through the yard, and I cried. I cried until I couldn't breathe. That night, I locked everything. Every window, every latch. I pulled the curtains tight, turning that old trailer into a suffocating metal box. I sat in the dark, gripping a kitchen knife, listening to my own heartbeat pounding in my chest. The house, usually full of creaks and groans, was dead silent. And then, right at midnight, I heard it. Not scratching, not begging, just 3 knocks. Tap, tap, tap. On my bedroom window, slow, measured, deliberate, like it was politely letting me know it had arrived. Then silence. The next night, I was sitting at the kitchen table. Midnight again. Tap, tap, tap. This time, on the kitchen window. It was moving, testing. It knew where I was. I found one of my uncle's old trail cameras and pointed it straight at the window. I needed proof. I wasn't crazy. The next morning, there was a clip. Time-stamped, midnight. I hit play. 10 seconds. 10 seconds of pure static, white noise screaming through the speakers like tearing metal. It didn't sound like any glitch I'd ever heard. More like a million insects shrieking all at once. And in one single frame, barely there, I swear I saw it. A warped shape, pressed against the glass. That static was worse than seeing its face. It was proof that whatever was out there wasn't supposed to exist. Its presence alone broke the rules of the world. The knocking continued, night after night, for a week. Always 3 times. Always at midnight. I stopped sleeping, stopped eating. I just sat there, waiting, until I couldn't anymore. I packed a bag, told my mom I was going to stay with my aunt in Raleigh for a while. I didn't explain. I didn't need to. She just looked at me, eyes hollow, tired, and nodded. Like someone who'd finally accepted that there are some darknesses she'll never fix. I left before sunset. I couldn't be there when the night came. Mason never came back. Police listed him as a runaway. A few posters went up, but no one really looked. He's done it before, they said. It was easier that way. But I know the truth. Sometimes, I still dream about those stairs. In the dream, they keep multiplying. 13 steps become 20, then 30. Each one darker, slicker, almost alive. And they don't lead up the hill anymore. They lead down, deep into the earth. And sometimes, right before I wake up, I swear I hear it again. That voice, calling my name, slowly, carefully, like it's practicing. I never went back to Calver Creek, and I never go near the woods again.